An American soldier walked into the same Iraqi village 3 different times in the summer of 2005, and every single time the same house was opened by a completely different family who all swore they had lived there for generations. But on his 4th visit, he found something written on the inside of the front door that none of the 3 families could have left behind, and that single sentence made him request an immediate transfer the very next morning. Before we step into this story, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and the bell is turned on, because every week we uncover quiet moments from the Iraq deployment that were never written into any official report, and you will not want to miss a single one. The village had no name on any official United States military map. It sat roughly 40 kilometers southwest of the city of Tikrit, tucked between 2 low ridges of pale stone, surrounded by dry farmland that turned to dust in late June. There were 11 houses in the village, a small mosque with a cracked minaret, and a single well at the center of a packed dirt courtyard. The patrols passed through it twice a week, as part of a routine reconnaissance loop. For most of the soldiers in the unit, the village was simply another stop on a long list of stops, forgotten by the time they reached the next checkpoint. But for Sergeant Daniel Reyes, 27 years old, originally from Bakersfield, California, this village would become something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Reyes had served 2 previous tours in Iraq before this one. He spoke functional Arabic, enough to ask basic questions, enough to read simple signs. He had a quiet way about him, the kind of soldier who listened more than he spoke, the kind who noticed things that others walked past without seeing. The first visit happened on June 12, 2005. The temperature that afternoon reached 43 degrees Celsius. The patrol entered the village just after 1 in the afternoon, parked their vehicles near the well, and began the standard procedure of greeting the local elders, asking about recent activity, and offering medical supplies if anyone needed them. Reyes was assigned to walk the eastern row of houses with a translator named Hassan, a local civilian who had been working with the unit for 9 months. The 3rd house on the eastern row was made of pale yellow brick, with a faded blue wooden door, and a small garden of dried herbs growing along the front wall. Reyes knocked. The door was opened by an older woman, perhaps 60 years of age, wearing a dark green dress and a simple headscarf. Behind her, 2 young children peeked out from the cool darkness of the interior. The woman introduced herself as Khadija. She told Reyes through the translator that her family had lived in this house for 4 generations, that her grandfather had built it with his own hands, that she had been born in the back room. She offered tea. Reyes declined politely and moved on. The visit lasted 6 minutes. He noted the family in his patrol log and forgot about them within the hour. The second visit happened on July 9, 2005, 27 days later. The patrol followed the same loop, parked in the same spot near the well, and Reyes walked the same eastern row with the same translator. When he reached the 3rd house with the faded blue door, he knocked again. This time the door was opened by a young man, perhaps 30 years old, wearing a gray work shirt and carrying a small child on his hip. Behind him, a woman moved quietly through the kitchen. The young man introduced himself as Yusuf. He told Reyes that he and his wife and their 3 children had lived in this house since his father had given it to them 5 years earlier. He said his family had owned the house for as long as anyone could remember. Reyes asked, carefully, if he knew a woman named Khadija. The young man frowned, thought for a moment, and said no, there was no Khadija in this village. Reyes did not press the issue. He walked back to the well, sat in the shade of the vehicle, and stared at his patrol log from June 12th. The handwriting was clear, the name was clear, Khadija. 3rd house eastern row, faded blue door, garden of dried herbs along the front wall. He looked toward the house. The dried herbs were still there. The blue door was still there. He told himself that perhaps the families were related. Perhaps Khadija was a relative who had visited that day, perhaps the translator had misunderstood. He wrote a note in the margin of his log, and continued the patrol. The 3rd visit happened on August 4th, 2005, 26 days later. By now Reyes was paying attention. He had asked Hassan to confirm the names beforehand, to be precise, to ask follow-up questions. When they reached the 3rd house with the faded blue door, the dried herbs along the front wall were gone. The garden had been cleared. Reyes knocked. The door was opened by an elderly man, perhaps 75 years old, Walking with the help of a wooden cane, he invited them inside without hesitation. Reyes accepted this time. The interior of the house was cooler than he remembered. The floor was the same. The walls were the same, but the furniture was different. Everything was different. The old man introduced himself as Abdul Rahman. He said he had lived in this house alone for the past 18 years. Ever since his wife had passed, he said the house had been built by his great-grandfather. When Reyes mentioned the names Khadija and Yusuf, the old man simply shook his head. He said no one by those names had ever lived in this village. He said he would know, because he was the oldest person remaining, and because he kept the records of births and deaths in his own hand, writing in a small leather book that he showed to Reyes. The book was real. The handwriting was old. There was no mention of a Khadija or a Yusuf, not in the past 40 years. Reyes left the village that afternoon, and did not speak for the entire drive back to the base. That night he sat alone in the small operations room, and pulled the patrol logs from June and July. The entries were exactly as he remembered. The names were exactly as he had written them. The descriptions of the families were detailed and specific. He had written down the color of Khadija's headscarf. He had written down the age of Yusuf's youngest child. These were not memories that could be confused. The fourth visit was not part of any official patrol. Reyes returned to the village on August 17, 2005, accompanied only by Hassan and one other soldier. He had requested permission for a follow-up wellness check, and his commanding officer had approved it without question. They arrived in the early morning, just after sunrise, when the air was still cool and the streets were empty. Reyes walked directly to the third house with the faded blue door. He knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Silence. Hassan tried the handle. The door was unlocked. The interior was completely empty. No furniture, no rugs, no belongings of any kind. The walls were bare. The floor was swept clean. There was no sign that anyone had lived there in months, perhaps years. Reyes walked through every room. He checked the back garden. He checked the small storage shed. There was nothing. No trace of Khadija, no trace of Yusuf, no trace of Abdul Rahman. It was on the way back out that he saw it. He was closing the front door when his eyes caught a line of writing carved into the inside of the wooden frame, low down near the bottom hinge, in a place that could only be seen if the door was wide open and the light was hitting it at the right angle. The writing was in Arabic, small and precise, carved deep into the wood with what must have been a sharp knife. Hassan crouched down and read it slowly twice, then a third time, and then sat back on his heels without speaking for nearly a full minute. When Hassan finally translated the sentence, his voice was barely above a whisper. The sentence read in careful Arabic, "Whoever opens this door 3 times will not recognize the village he returns to." Reyes asked Hassan if it was a proverb. Hassan said no. He had never heard it before in his life. He said it did not sound like any saying from this region. He said, it sounded like something written specifically for one person. Reyes left the village that morning and never returned. He requested a transfer the following day, citing personal reasons that were never recorded in detail. He was reassigned to a different sector within 72 hours. He never spoke about the village again, not to his unit, not to his family, not in the years after he came home. The patrol logs from June, July, and August were filed away in the standard archives. No follow-up was ever conducted. The village remained on the map, unnamed, and other patrols continued to pass through it on their routine loops, none of them ever reporting anything unusual about the third house with the faded blue door. Sergeant Daniel Reyes returned home to Bakersfield, California in the spring of 2006. He left the military 2 years later. He never wrote about the village, never gave interviews, never told the story to anyone outside of one quiet conversation with his older brother in the autumn of 2011. The patrol logs still exist. The carved sentence on the door still exists, and somewhere between the official records and the quiet places where soldiers keep their memories, 3 families continue to live in the same house, separated only by a door that was opened 3 times. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to leave a like, because every like helps quiet stories like this one find the people who need to hear them. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, so you never miss the next story we bring out of the archives. Drop a comment below, and tell us which part of this story stayed with you the longest, and which kind of story you want us to uncover next. We will see you in the next one, where another soldier opens a door that should have stayed closed.